It's Friday. You know what that means. It is time to put the picks on the table for a big weekend of football here on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome back to a Friday edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. We're breaking down all the games going down this weekend. We're down a couple of them because Tulane's off this week. La Tech played earlier in the week, but we're going to waste little time and get right into why you are listening in, and we appreciate you doing so. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And also follow us on social media. Just search Louisiana Lunch Hour. So without further ado, let's get right into it and talk about one of the big games on deck this week. It has to be the LSU Tigers taking on the Texas A&M Aggies. And if this were a few years ago, I'd feel weird saying it, but this Texas A&M team has looked great so far. As much as I would love to see this since Goliath defeat David, but it's going to be very difficult, I think, in my mind, to see that happening. I got to go with Texas A&M getting the win. I think LSU just is clearly, I'd say, a level, if not two levels below what we've seen from Texas A&M so far. They're a top 4 team in the country for a very distinct reason. Yes, they wound up looking a little bit out of sorts against Arkansas last weekend, but you still got to think Texas A&M is going to handle business against an LSU team that has clearly shown over the last few weeks that they are good against, the lower tier teams. Like you look at Clemson, you look at Florida, you look at all the teams they've beaten so far this season. There's a clear line of demarcation. It's the teams that are above, head and shoulders in a sense, above the rest, they struggle against. Case in point, Vanderbilt a few weeks ago, Ole Miss not too long ago. Like those two teams alone, those two losses have loomed large and kind of have shown there are plenty of chinks in the armor. And that's not the only reason why we're saying that. It's simply because the teams you beat, like Clemson, like Florida, and South Carolina, you beat them, but they were nowhere near definitive. This feels like a loss for the LSU Tigers at this point in the season. And it would suck to see that simply because you're going to get into the month of November. Alabama, Arkansas, Western Kentucky, and Oklahoma. You could be staring at 7-5 at the end of the season. And that's not what anybody expected. And again, there's still a very, very, very outside chance that this team could make the college football playoff. They'd have to run the table. And I think right now, running the table is a feat that I don't even think, Goliath could ever do. David could never do. And I don't think we see the Nuss Bus get it done at home against a fierce rival, at least on one side of the fence. They believe that it is a fierce rivalry. I kind of just believe A&M is going to believe it's a rivalry. LSU's going to say, nah, our rivalry is with teams like Alabama, Florida, and Ole Miss. But I think there's going to be another chapter written that could make this maybe a little bit more of a competitive rivalry, because honestly, the first half of this decade of Texas A&M being inside the Conference of Dixie, it was all LSU. Now it seems like the pendulum is starting to turn, and for LSU, it's turning for the worse. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of the same this Saturday night when LSU takes on Vandy. Kickoff for that one is going to be at 6:30. Now flip it over to the Cajuns taking on the Troy Trojans, and Troy has looked pretty good so far this season, all things considered. Now I think the billion-dollar question that's going to be running through people's minds, not just this week, but the following week, is how is this Cajuns team going to look? Will we see more or will we see less of one Lunch Winfield? Will we see more or less than what we saw last week from Walker Howard? Obviously, he wanted to throw him in there in the 2-minute offense to see if they could change things. Lo and behold, we did not see much change. Last week, Troy handled business 37-14 against the UL Monroe Warhawks, which, in all honesty, could be the only other win on the table for the Raging Cajuns, at least right here, right now. I feel like Arkansas State might be one of those games the Cajuns can handle business against when they face off against them. But you've still got to kind of figure out what the hell is going on with your offense, as well as your defense. But your offense committed a ton of turnovers, and that was a big reason why they lost the game. And also, they couldn't capitalize off of the turnovers that they were able to get from from the Southern Miss team last week for homecoming. Now you're in Alabama for the next 2 games. Tonight is in Troy, or tomorrow night, I should say. It's going to be at Troy, and then you deal with South Alabama with a 2:30 kickoff. At the end of the day, I got to go with Troy getting the win here, but I feel like it is going to be a competitive ball game. It's going to be one of those where you sit there after this weekend and you're just kind of like, yeah, I thought they could have won that game. It's going to be a lot like the JMU game in my mind. It's going to look competitive on paper, but when you look at the scoreboard, when you look at the stats and everything, you're going to see a lot more issues just based off of that eyeball test. Meanwhile, UL Monroe going to be making a trip over to Southern Miss. And I feel like UL Monroe, the wheels have been falling off, and I would not be surprised if they continue to fall apart as we kind of progress and move into the month of November with a tough loss to Southern Miss. I feel like that's going to be at least a 2-touchdown victory, especially after what we saw this past weekend with the Cajuns losing to Southern Miss in homecoming. You got to imagine how much worse it could be with Southern Miss hosting the Warhawks, who haven't necessarily inspired a whole lot of teams. Another game to kind of look forward to, jumping over to the SWAC briefly, is the Southern Jaguars against Florida A&M. You've got interim head coach Fred McNair, and he seems like he's eyeing to take over as a head coach on a more permanent basis. He has a 5-game audition, and it starts tomorrow night against Florida A&M. And it's always interesting. The first game with a new head coach that you throw in the interim, because that will set the tone for the rest of the year. And I think, based off of all I've heard, I think we're going to see this interim coach, McNair, he is going to compete. He's going to help this team get better. But you are going to need to see him pretty much have, I'd say, a 4-1, 5-0 finish to the season in order to go from being the interim and taking that tag off and being considered the permanent head coach. And not permanent as in he's got a lifetime contract, but he's around as long as he's able to kind of turn it around. You look at what this program has done with Roman Banks running things. You have had 2 coaches who had decent records, won the division. The next year you fire him. It's still one of the most maddening things I've seen in a hot minute, but I feel like just based off of the fact that you are going to be seeing a brand new head coach in that interim spot, and it feels like 9 times out of 10 that results in a win, no matter who you are. If you have a new head coach, things change in a big way. And this team wants to play for him, and that leads to a surprise win. I feel like that's going to be one of the more surprising victories over the course of this weekend. Meanwhile, Southeastern Louisiana is going to be traveling to take on Houston Christian. I got to give the edge to Southeastern here. Their offense has started to really click, and they're playing against a Houston Christian team that did not look all that great this past weekend. So I feel like it's another nice win for the Lions out in Hammond, America. Jumping over to the Chuck. We've got McNeese State, the Cowboys, taking on the Colonels of Nichols, another in-state rivalry. I feel like the Cowboys, based off of what we've seen so far, they are going to handle business against Tommy Rybecki's team. Again, first-year head coach. It was nice to see them get a win to start the season, but man, I wouldn't mind seeing another one, but I feel like McNeese is a little bit better equipped for this situation. Flipping over Northwestern State taking on Lamar. I think we're going to see Lamar win that one. It's not even going to be close again. It's been a first-year head coach. Only one win, not necessarily the best look, but I think they're going to give him a little bit more rope than Terrence Graves. He's got to kind of get this thing together. That's the number one kind of question that I have right here, right now. Then you have another SWAC team with Grambling taking on Jackson State. I think Jackson State wins this one. Going to be a very competitive ball game, but I think Jackson State edges them out. They'll wrap up in a nice little bow on this Friday, a little express lane style edition of the pod. We're talking Saints. We're talking the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Can we see the Saints pull off a massive upset and upset the apple cart and beat an NFC division rival? I don't think so. And it's simply because this team has not shown me anything that's convincing me otherwise. This is a much better, well-oiled machine that we've seen from the Bucs that we have in recent years. Yes, they're without Mike Evans, and it feels like he may be done after the season, after the injury that he suffered, and it's seemingly an end of an era. You don't have Marshawn Lattimore on the field anymore for the Saints. You don't have Mike Evans out on the field on this Sunday afternoon, a 3 o'clock kick. Thank God it's on Fox. But I firmly believe we are going to see the Saints lose this one. Again, very competitive ball game. Any other year, the ball could bounce either way. But I feel like this ball is not bouncing the way of the New Orleans Saints, no matter who they're playing. Because I think at a certain extent, it's the universe telling us and telling the players, hey, we need to start rebuilding and start doing this now. That's the way I see things. But I'm about to get out of here. Have a great rest of your Friday and have a great weekend as well. You've been listening to the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast.